All right, so all I'm going to do today is demonstrate these Velociraptor projects, and they needed a lot of updates. Anna Marie did them over the last couple of weeks, and there were a lot of problems, and I spent a lot of time updating them all. So the first thing you have to do is you have to have a Windows and a Linux virtual machine. Now in this class, most of you probably already have a Windows virtual machine you're using to run Autopsy. And if you do, you can just use that. But if you don't, then you can make one here. And I updated these instructions too, so hopefully they work, because it used to be, at the start of this class, I think you could go to Microsoft and download a pre-built Windows 10 machine and just unzip it and run it. But they don't let you do that anymore. Now all you can get is an ISO. So you have to go to, and Windows 11 is probably what we should be using. Windows 10 is coming to the end of life. So you go here, and there's two links for the Intel processor and the ARM processor. So if you have a Windows machine or an older Mac, then you have an Intel processor, and you'll get Windows here from Microsoft, but what you get is an ISO. You no longer get a whole machine. You just get the installer disk. So you can get the ISO here, and if you have a Mac running Apple Silicon, which is the M1 or M2 or anything later, then you get this one, which again is the ISO for ARM-based PCs. You have to get the ISO image, which is a disk image that matches your hardware, and then you install it. And there's a guide here that shows you how to install Windows if you haven't done it. It's a pretty easy process. You boot, the only part that's a little tricky is to boot from the CD. The virtual CD, you have to click and press enter inside the virtual machine, and you have only like 1 or 2 seconds to do it. So it often takes a couple of tries. But then you go through a lot of setup screens like this and install Windows. And if you have an Intel processor, the installation should go through fine with the defaults. If you have an ARM processor, the installed virtual machine will not be able to reach the internet. So it will stall out during installation at a certain point, which is here. If you're on this, you'll reach a point where it says, let's connect you to a network, and it won't be able to connect to a network because it doesn't have the drivers for the network card. And so the cure for that, you have to press Shift Function F10 to get a command prompt and execute this OOBE command to change the out-of-box experience. This is a trick I've been using for a couple of years. This way you can restart the last stage of installation without a network. Because what this does, it'll let you make a local account with just a name and password instead of trying to get you to make a Microsoft Cloud account, which is now the default for Windows 11. So that's the only gotcha. And regardless of whether you have Intel or ARM, after you install it, you'll have a machine that doesn't really work very well because it doesn't have VMware tools. So you have to install VMware tools from your VMware menu. Virtual machine, install VMware tools. That will load the tools as a virtual CD, and you can install it from there. And the tools are very useful, so copy and paste will work, so you can resize the desktop, and for the ARM version, they include the network driver you need to reach the internet. So you really have to install the tools. Anyway, that's the only gotchas. If you've installed Windows before, it's a pretty familiar process. And Linux is the same. For ARM, you got to get an ARM ISO and then install Linux. One thing that's rude about Debian, for some ridiculous reason, a default install of Debian doesn't include sudo. I don't know what they're thinking, so you have to execute these commands to install sudo and to elevate your user to a sudoer. The only Linux distribution I know that doesn't give you sudo by default. But anyway, those are the commands to fix it.
But forgive me, Sam, for those who have a Windows machine, they have to install on the virtual machine just Debian, right?
Well, yeah, if you have the Windows machine, then you can just download a pre-made Debian, which is what we've been doing. You just go here, and you just download it from here, and then it's already got sudo, and it's already got a user account and everything. That's what we've been doing, and that works too. You could also install it, but you don't need to. There's this pre-made one available. All right, so then you'll end up with this. You'll end up with, I've got mine. These are fresh machines I just installed right before class, so I can show you all the steps. Here's my brand new Windows machine and my brand new Debian machine. And I chose the headless Debian, the one I like. Most beginning students would probably like to get a Debian with a desktop, so you can open browsers and stuff. I really don't care about that. And so what I do is I just log in and do IPA in here to see the IP address, which is 192.168.121.142, And I always prefer to control it by SSH. So let me just connect again. Okay. So your SSH username at that IP address. And if you're on Windows, you can use SSH in PowerShell, but if that doesn't work, which it frequently doesn't, then you download PuTTY. PuTTY is the old tool we've been using since like Windows 95 to add SSH to Windows. And a student had to do that for some ridiculous reason. A modern Windows 11 SSH didn't work, so supposedly Microsoft added it to PowerShell like 5 years ago, but as usual, when Microsoft does something, they do it pretty badly and break it and make it wrong.
Also, Windows 11 is giving by default a PowerShell 5 version, and you should update, it has some problems, you should update it to the latest version.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe you have to update it. That might be the problem. But I was surprised a student went to PowerShell, and usually you can just type SSH in PowerShell and it works, but not on that machine, so maybe that's it. Anyway, so now I'm in control of this machine in an SSH window, which is the way I like to control it. I don't have any desktop, so I don't use the console. I'll use this because then I can copy and paste and resize it and all that good stuff. This is the way you control cloud machines too. So that's what this IR100 project is. To get you started, you have to have a Windows machine and a Linux machine. And they should both be virtual machines because you're ultimately going to put malware on that Windows machine. Okay, so anyway, and it could be Windows Server or Windows 10. It doesn't matter what version it is. But most of the time, people would use Windows 11 these days. That's the most common version. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about IR100. Let me stop this recording.